Welcome to InfoStream, your daily current. Unsure what to listen to? Turn to us for today's headlines. Stay informed. Trump-Putin Alaska summit highlights negotiations, seeks Ukraine ceasefire through Alaska meeting. Complex negotiations emerge from U.S.-Russia summit. Zelensky prepares for UK meeting. Appeals court upholds foreign aid cuts. Producer prices indicate rising inflation. U.S.-China trade remains. Supports SpaceX's regulatory changes. Gaza element is by Scarborough. Energy relations. Operation Disparity. And venue right assigned security. North Korea venue retains primary goods for us and is man up here or slowly over put all us around the lights to over Shoal Trump-Putin Alaska summit, a complex landscape of negotiations. The upcoming summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska represents a pivotal moment in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and broader geopolitical relations. The primary focus of the discussion centers around securing a ceasefire and establishing long-term peace, with potential negotiations extending to strategic offensive weapons control, including nuclear arms treaties. Trump believes Putin is going to make a deal, anticipating a trilateral meeting involving Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, though the Ukrainian perspective remains critical, demanding inclusion in any final agreements. Several key elements shape the summit's context. Trump's repeated references to land swapping have fueled concerns regarding potential territorial concessions from Ukraine. Putin has hinted at discussions regarding strategic weapons control, referencing the New START treaty's expiration. The U.S. recently deployed nuclear submarines near Russia in response to provocative statements from Dmitry Medvedev, a move that underscores heightened tensions. European leaders engaged in a call with Trump, expressing their desire for a ceasefire and emphasizing Ukraine's essential role in any future negotiations. While Trump appeared receptive to their concerns, the absence of Ukraine from the summit remains a significant point of contention. Putin's negotiating team, led by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Defense Minister Andrei Belousov, will be joined by Finance Minister Anton Siluanov and Kirill Dmitriev, a senior negotiator and head of Russia's Sovereign Wealth Fund. The summit will initially involve a one-on-one conversation, followed by a business lunch, culminating in a joint or individual press conference, depending on the outcome. Despite the potential for progress, significant obstacles remain, including Ukraine's insistence on its territorial integrity and the complex dynamics of international relations. The summit's success hinges on the ability of both leaders to bridge these divides and forge a path towards a sustainable resolution to the conflict. The possibility of a second meeting involving all three parties is being considered, further emphasizing the significance of this Alaskan encounter. Trump's Alaska meeting aims to pressure Putin toward Ukraine's ceasefire. President Donald Trump's upcoming meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska centers on achieving a ceasefire in the Ukraine conflict, though expectations remain cautiously low. Recent developments reveal a concerted effort by Trump to exert pressure on Putin, encompassing a range of strategies from direct communication to potential economic sanctions. A key element of Trump's approach involves framing a ceasefire as a gesture of goodwill from Russia, implicitly suggesting that Putin's willingness to negotiate would be contingent on territorial concessions, a position sharply contrasting with the prevailing view among European leaders, who insist Ukraine's territorial integrity must be a central component of any agreement. Following a tense public confrontation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in February, Trump has engaged in multiple phone calls with both leaders, seeking to facilitate a negotiated settlement. However, Putin's apparent lack of engagement has prompted a shift in strategy, with White House officials exploring the possibility of imposing new secondary sanctions on China if a deal isn't reached. Trump has repeatedly expressed his belief in a very good relationship with Putin, yet this hasn't translated into immediate progress. The meeting in Alaska represents a heightened pressure campaign, fueled by Trump's growing frustration with Putin's stance. European diplomats have voiced concerns about Trump's potential to undermine the collective effort to secure Ukraine's sovereignty. They emphasize the necessity of including Ukraine's territorial demands in any negotiation. White House officials are preparing to potentially leverage secondary sanctions against China if the meeting fails to yield a breakthrough. The prospect of these sanctions adds another layer of complexity to the situation, highlighting the significant stakes involved in the upcoming discussions. The meeting itself is viewed as a pivotal moment in the ongoing conflict, with the potential to reshape the dynamics of the war and its broader geopolitical implications. Trump's meeting with Putin, a complex and uncertain negotiation. Donald Trump's upcoming meeting with Vladimir Putin is fraught with complexity and uncertainty, driven by Putin's intensified ideological motivations and a persistent belief that a victory in Ukraine is essential for his continued leadership. The meeting's significance stems from Putin's shift towards a more imperialistic worldview, shaping his approach to negotiations and raising concerns among Western allies regarding potential compromises. Several key factors underpin the meeting's potential challenges. Putin's determination to secure a Ukrainian victory, coupled with his perception of the West as an adversary, suggests a reluctance to concede ground. Intelligence assessments indicate that Putin's circle remains tightly controlled, making it difficult to discern his true intentions. A persistent hard target for Western intelligence agencies. Recent developments highlight the potential for misinterpretations. Steve Witkoff, Trump's primary interlocutor, expressed frustration with Russia's tactics, while Putin reportedly discussed territorial exchanges for a ceasefire, alarming European allies. Ukrainian intelligence warns that Putin is not preparing for a genuine peace settlement, aiming instead to portray the meeting as a personal victory. The meeting's significance is amplified by Putin's isolated behavior during the COVID-19 pandemic, which narrowed his social circle and potentially solidified his belief in a more confrontational approach. Intelligence reports suggest Putin's underlying motivations remain rooted in imperial ambitions, complicating negotiations. Western analysts and former officials caution against underestimating Putin's resolve. They emphasize that he is unlikely to prioritize Western interests, viewing the conflict as a crucial test of Russia's power and influence. The meeting presents a delicate balancing act for Trump, navigating the complexities of a relationship with a leader who demonstrably seeks to challenge the existing global order. Zelensky prepares for UK meeting ahead of US-Russia summit. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is scheduled to meet with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in London prior to a critical US-Russia summit in Alaska, marking the first time Putin has been permitted to meet on Western soil since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. This meeting comes amidst heightened tensions and concerns about a potential deal between Trump and Putin without significant concessions from Ukraine. The ongoing stepped-up Russian offensive, including overnight drone attacks resulting in casualties and fires near Volgograd, underscores the continued intensity of the conflict. Zelensky's strategy involves bolstering support from key allies, including a telephone conversation with Trump and participation in a coordinated online call with European leaders, NATO and EU chiefs to demonstrate a unified front against Russia. Starmer expressed optimism regarding a potential ceasefire, attributing this shift to Trump's efforts. However, Zelensky remains skeptical, stating Putin definitely does not want peace. Trump's previous mixed messaging regarding a potential three-way summit, coupled with his impatience with Putin, adds complexity. He has suggested a second meeting is possible if the initial summit proceeds favorably, but cautioned against it if he doesn't receive desired answers. The coalition of the willing, comprised of Ukraine's military backers, is developing workable military plans in case of a ceasefire, alongside preparing to exert pressure on Russia through sanctions. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte emphasized that the responsibility for initiating a ceasefire rests with Putin. The US-Russia summit represents a pivotal moment, with all parties actively pushing for progress in the hours leading up to the meeting. The situation remains volatile, with ongoing attacks and divergent views on the path forward, creating a delicate diplomatic landscape. The outcome of the Alaska summit will significantly shape the future of the conflict and Ukraine's relationship with the West. Trump administration's foreign aid cuts upheld by appeals court. A U.S. appeals court has delivered a significant victory for President Donald Trump, ruling that the Trump administration can proceed with its plan to cut billions in foreign aid. The decision reverses a prior lower court judgment that mandated the restoration of previously approved funds by Congress. The ruling, based on the argument that the plaintiffs' international aid groups lacked sufficient standing to challenge the administration's actions, allows for the continuation of substantial funding reductions. Specifically, nearly $4 billion earmarked for global health programs, including HIV and AIDS initiatives approved through 2028, can be eliminated. Furthermore, over $6 billion allocated for these same programs can be axed. The administration's move follows a 90-day pause on all foreign assistance imposed by Trump upon his return to the White House. This pause was met with legal challenges from aid groups, who argued it was an unlawful interference with congressional appropriations. The administration's actions have involved a dramatic reduction in USAID's operations, with over 80% of its programs canceled as of March. USAID officially closed its doors on July 1st. The Trump administration has criticized USAID spending as wasteful. Former presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama have strongly condemned the cuts. Researchers at the Lancet Journal have warned that these cuts could lead to an additional 14 million deaths by 2030, highlighting the potential humanitarian consequences of the administration's policies. The appeals court's decision represents a major win for Trump's strategy of prioritizing domestic spending and reducing the U.S. government's role in international aid. The legal battle is not entirely over, but the immediate prospect of restoring the previously approved funds appears unlikely. Producer Price Index signals rising inflation, threatening Fed rate cut hopes. Recent Producer Price Index (PPI) data reveals a significant surge in inflation, prompting concerns about the Federal Reserve's potential for future interest rate cuts. The July report showed a 0.9% monthly increase in wholesale prices, marking the fastest pace since June 2022, with the annual rate climbing to 3.3%. This spike, exceeding economist expectations, indicates that inflationary pressures are intensifying within the U.S. economy. The PPI's volatility, particularly its susceptibility to wild swings, has heightened scrutiny, with attention focused on how President Donald Trump's tariffs are impacting production costs. Over 3/4 of the increase stemmed from the services sector, notably a substantial 4.5% jump in purchase capital equipment prices, signaling a broadening of inflationary pressures beyond industrial goods. Furthermore, a dramatic 12.8% leap in raw agricultural product prices, including a 38.9% surge in fresh and dry vegetables, a trend attributed to tariffs on Mexican agricultural imports, contributed significantly to the overall increase. This data underscores the tangible effects of trade policies on domestic prices. The situation is complicated by ongoing challenges within the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a BLS, following President Trump's dismissal of the commissioner and subsequent claims of data manipulation. The agency is currently navigating a period of reduced funding and workforce constraints, leading to a curtailment of index calculations and data collections. Despite these challenges, the PPI's upward trajectory is casting a shadow over optimistic forecasts for rate cuts. Concerns are mounting that hotter-than-expected inflation will outweigh positive developments in the labor market, particularly given shifts in immigration policy and an aging workforce. The BLS is currently undergoing a leadership transition with a newly nominated commissioner, E.J. Antoni, and ongoing debates regarding data collection methodologies. The agency's reduced resources and data limitations add further uncertainty to economic assessments. The July jobs report, which showed a surprising 73,000 jobs added, alongside downward revisions for prior months, has amplified these anxieties. The overall trend indicates that inflationary pressures are gaining momentum, potentially hindering the Fed's plans for rate reductions. U.S.-China trade truce, a complex game of leverage and strategic shifts. How the United States and China have established a tentative, pragmatic trade relationship marked by a 90-day truce extension, driven by a complex strategy of leveraging vulnerabilities and securing strategic advantages. Despite tariffs remaining at elevated levels, both nations are engaged in a high-stakes, three-dimensional chess game, focused on reshaping the economic and technological balance of power. Under President Trump's approach, the trade war has accelerated efforts to exploit China's control over rare earth elements, a critical component in numerous industries. U.S. officials, alongside corporate executives, have encountered difficulties accessing these materials, alongside demands for corporate data and attempts to restrict national security purchases. This sparked a global wake-up call, prompting intense negotiations aimed at ensuring a stable supply of magnets and other essential components. The U.S. has employed a multi-faceted strategy, including imposing export controls on software tools, aerospace equipment, and ethane, alongside securing commitments from allies like Japan and South Korea to provide billions of dollars for U.S. supply chain reshoring. This involves redirecting funds to bolster U.S. industries and reduce reliance on Chinese influence. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent describes this arrangement as a sovereign wealth fund, allowing the U.S. to direct investments. The U.S. is also attempting to gain access to lower-tier artificial intelligence chips, despite opposition from within his own party, aiming to secure a foothold in the global AI race. Trump has secured exemptions from forthcoming semiconductor tariffs in exchange for commitments from tech firms to manufacture in the U.S. The administration is focused on regaining technological advantage and controlling key industries. The dynamic has created friction with allies, particularly Japan, who have expressed concerns about the structure and implementation of the agreements. Despite these challenges, Trump maintains a strong personal relationship with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, fueling speculation about a potential in-person meeting later this year. Ultimately, both sides recognize the necessity of maintaining a degree of cooperation, with the US dependent on China for access to technology and trade, while China relies on the US for economic stability and global influence. The current arrangement, characterized by strategic concessions and mutual leverage, represents a precarious but evolving equilibrium in the world's most important economic relationship. Trump's executive order boosts SpaceX amidst regulatory changes. In a move anticipated to favor SpaceX and its CEO Elon Musk, President Donald Trump signed an executive order Wednesday designed to significantly ease regulations governing the private space industry. The order's primary objective is to substantially increase the frequency of space launches within the United States, reflecting Trump's renewed focus on space exploration initiatives. This action follows Trump's previous pronouncements regarding ambitious plans for human missions to the Moon and Mars, which are slated to utilize SpaceX's Starship rocket. Despite recent setbacks, including a fiery explosion during a routine Starship test in June, SpaceX remains a dominant force in the global launch market, having conducted over 130 launches in the past year. The executive order explicitly aims to foster a competitive launch marketplace, directly benefiting SpaceX operations. Notably, the order compels Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, currently NASA's administrator, to expedite or eliminate the Department of Transportation's environmental reviews associated with launches. Critics, including the Center for Biological Diversity, have voiced strong concerns regarding the potential environmental impact of increased launches, particularly those involving Starship. They argue that the order paves the way for the destruction of protected plant and animal species due to the risk of rocket explosions and resultant devastation. Despite these objections, the FAA approved a 5-fold increase in annual Starship launches to 25, asserting that this heightened frequency would not negatively impact the environment. SpaceX's fail fast, learn fast approach continues to underpin its strategy, while Trump's past advisory role underscores the significant connection between the two figures. The executive order represents a strategic move to bolster the American space industry and support SpaceX ambitions, despite ongoing environmental scrutiny. Israeli settlement expansion and restrictions on aid to Gaza. Recent developments highlight escalating tensions and strategic actions surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Firstly, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich announced plans to build over 3,000 homes in the E1 settlement project, a move widely condemned as effectively eliminating the possibility of a Palestinian state. Smotrich asserted that this expansion would bury the idea of a Palestinian state due to the lack of recognition and sovereignty it would create. This decision follows increased international pressure for peace and the announcement of recognition efforts by several countries. Simultaneously, humanitarian organizations are reporting severe restrictions on aid deliveries to Gaza, citing new Israeli regulations implemented in March. These regulations, designed to prevent Hamas involvement, have effectively halted the entry of critical supplies, with over 100 organizations jointly calling for their immediate cessation. The new Israeli rules require NGOs to register and adhere to strict conditions, including avoiding any language that could be interpreted as delegitimizing Israel and providing detailed information about Palestinian staff. Despite claims from Israeli authorities that aid is flowing freely, with approximately 300 trucks entering Gaza daily, humanitarian groups report that over 60 requests for aid were denied in July alone. Organizations like ANERA have substantial supplies, including rice for 6 million meals, blocked in Ashdod. Israeli officials maintain that these delays occur only when organizations fail to meet security requirements. The situation is further complicated by the government's efforts to control the narrative surrounding the conflict. Minister Amichai Chikli stated that organizations promoting delegitimization campaigns against Israel would be denied permission to operate. This strategy is coupled with the expansion of Israeli settlements, a long-standing point of contention and a key factor in the ongoing humanitarian crisis within Gaza. The combined effect of these actions underscores the deeply entrenched challenges in achieving a peaceful resolution and highlights the severe consequences of the ongoing conflict on the civilian population. Jimmy Lai's imminent death in prison, a critical test for China-UK relations. The trial of Jimmy Lai, Hong Kong's pro-democracy media tycoon, is nearing a critical stage, raising serious concerns about his health and potentially signaling a significant deterioration in China-UK relations. Lai, 77, is accused of colluding with foreign forces under Hong Kong's national security law, a charge he denies. He faces a maximum sentence of life imprisonment if convicted, having been detained since December 2020. The trial's postponement due to a black rainstorm highlights the precarious situation and the potential for further disruptions. Lai's son, Sebastian Lai, has repeatedly expressed fears about his father's well-being, stating that even a 5-year sentence would be akin to a death penalty given his advanced age and declining health. He believes Lai is almost certain to die in prison. This sentiment underscores the immense physical and psychological strain the trial is placing on the elderly media mogul. Lai's case is central to China's control over Hong Kong and represents a significant challenge to the UK's standing. His arrest and trial are viewed as a deliberate attempt to silence dissent and suppress pro-democracy voices in the territory. Critics argue the national security law has been weaponized to target political opposition. Jimmy Lai rose from humble beginnings, fleeing communist China as a child and building a multi-million-dollar empire through Giordano before pivoting to become a vocal critic of the Chinese state. Following the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, he established Next and Apple Daily, publications that fearlessly challenge Beijing's authority. Despite facing threats, including arson attacks and an assassination attempt, Lai continued to publish critical content. His arrest and trial are seen as a test of the UK's commitment to defending democratic values and protecting its citizens abroad. Sebastian Lai believes that if Lai dies in prison, it would demonstrate that the UK did not stand up for one of its bravest when it mattered most. The trial's outcome will undoubtedly have far-reaching implications for the future of Hong Kong and the broader relationship between China and the United Kingdom. Sudan's humanitarian crisis deepens with cholera outbreak and starvation. The ongoing conflict in Sudan is exacerbating a multifaceted humanitarian crisis, primarily centered around widespread starvation and a devastating cholera outbreak. The fighting between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces, (RSF), continues to cripple civilian life, particularly in the western Darfur region, and has created conditions ripe for disease outbreaks. El-Fasher, a key battleground and the last major stronghold of the army in Darfur, is experiencing a severe food shortage, with prices soaring to unsustainable levels, leaving families unable to afford even basic sustenance. Volunteers at the Matbak Al-Khair communal kitchen are forced to utilize unconventional sources, like ambaz, a type of seed residue, to feed the population. Simultaneously, Sudan is grappling with the country's worst cholera outbreak in years, driven by the mass displacement of civilians fleeing the fighting. Over 99,700 suspected cases have been reported, with 470 deaths recorded through August 11th, largely concentrated in Darfur. The outbreak is compounded by the destruction of water infrastructure, limited access to clean water, and the movement of displaced populations, further straining already overwhelmed healthcare systems. Approximately 380,000 people have sought refuge in Tawila, North Darfur State, creating a massive humanitarian burden. Residents are surviving on an average of just 3 liters of water per day, far below the emergency minimum threshold, leading to increased risk of contamination and disease. The situation is further complicated by contaminated wells and damaged sewage systems, exacerbated by heavy rains. Amidst Sans Frontières SF is working tirelessly to combat the outbreak, treating over 300 patients and reporting 40 deaths in the past week. However, the scale of the crisis is overwhelming, with survivors resorting to drinking from contaminated sources. The conflict's impact extends beyond immediate casualties, threatening to create a long-term crisis of malnutrition and disease. International organizations are calling for a humanitarian pause to allow aid delivery, but bureaucratic obstacles and continued fighting impede access. The situation is described as beyond urgent, with the risk of the disease spreading to neighboring Chad and South Sudan. J.D. Vance's UK holiday sparks diverse reactions and security concerns. Vice President J.D. Vance commenced his private UK holiday with a golf outing at Donald Trump's Turnberry course in Scotland, following a similar visit by Trump himself. Vance's trip, accompanied by his family, has been marked by a significant security operation, including road closures and airspace restrictions, lasting until Sunday. He is staying at Carnell Estates near Kilmarnock, Ayrshire, a 14th-century estate with over 2,000 acres. His arrival was met by pro-Palestinian protesters, who were subsequently contained by police. Concurrent with his Scottish activities, Vance engaged in meetings with U.S. military personnel at RAF Fairford, Gloucestershire, receiving briefings on base capabilities. He also held discussions with David Lammy regarding Gaza and international affairs at Chevening House in Kent. Vance's focus on establishing connections with rural communities is evident in his visit to the Cotswolds, where his presence triggered protests and local reactions. Residents of the Cotswolds voiced their displeasure at the disruption caused by Vance's security arrangements, describing him as a bit of a mouth. The visit necessitated extensive road closures and security measures, leading to local frustration. Vance's attempts to connect with the U.S. military at RAF Fairford were met with admiration for the base's operations. Throughout his trip, Vance has maintained a busy schedule, including meetings with Conservative MPs Robert Jenrick and Chris Philp, and Reform UK leader Nigel Farage. The security operation surrounding his stay at Carnell Estates underscores the heightened attention his visit has garnered. Vance's deliberate efforts to connect with rural communities, particularly in the Cotswolds, highlight a strategy to build relationships and potentially garner support. The ongoing security measures and varied local reactions demonstrate the complexities and potential tensions associated with his private visit to the UK. Vance's planned 5-day stay in Scotland mirrors Trump's previous visit, and his engagements continue to draw scrutiny and diverse perspectives. U.S. Navy conducts FONOP near disputed Scarborough Shoal amid rising tensions. The United States Navy conducted a freedom of navigation operations, FONOP, near Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea on Wednesday, escalating tensions following a recent collision between Chinese and Philippine vessels. This marked the first FONOP near the shoal in over 6 years and the second in 2025, following one in the Spratly Islands in May. The operation involved the USS Higgins, DDG-76, and, according to Navy spokesperson Sarah Merrill, asserted navigational rights and freedoms consistent with international law. China's military accused the U.S. Navy of violating its territorial sovereignty, claiming the USS Higgins organized its forces to track, monitor, warn, and expel the warship. However, Merrill firmly denied these accusations, stating that the U.S. actions were defending its right to operate wherever international law allows. The Philippine Coast Guard also had U.S. warships nearby, including the USS Cincinnati, further demonstrating the multifaceted nature of the situation. The incident occurred 2 days after a Chinese Navy-guided missile destroyer and Coast Guard ship collided while chasing a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, resulting in significant damage to the Chinese Coast Guard ship's bow. China blamed the Philippines, and indirectly, the U.S., citing the Philippine Coast Guard's dangerous maneuvers that severely compromised navigational safety. Chinese experts, as reported by the Global Times, argued that the Philippine vessel had no obligation to heave to or give way. The Global Times presented a 26-second video allegedly showing reckless action by the Philippine vessel, though it did not capture the collision. Yang Xiao, a maritime expert, attributed the incident to U.S. training of the Philippines in gray zone tactics, suggesting these tactics violate international norms and could lead to miscalculations. Carl Schuster, a former U.S. Navy captain, reviewed the video and determined that the overtaking Chinese ship bore responsibility for signaling its intentions, as the Philippine Coast Guard had no obligation to yield. The collision underscores ongoing disputes over Scarborough Shoal, a strategically vital area rich in fishing grounds, and highlights the increasing assertiveness of Beijing, while the Philippines pushes back with independent maritime missions. The situation remains volatile with potential for further escalation. Australia and Vanuatu formalized $328 million security and business. Pact. Australia and Vanuatu have solidified a significant 10-year agreement valued at $500 million, approximately to $241 million, representing a major step in strengthening security and economic ties between the two nations. The deal, formerly known as the Nakamal Agreement, emerged from months of intensive negotiations and is slated for official signing in September. This initiative reflects Australia's strategic efforts to bolster its influence within the Pacific region, directly countering China's increasing economic and political presence. Vanuatu's Prime Minister Jotham Napat characterized the agreement as a win-win situation, highlighting the mutual benefits for both countries. A key component involves substantial investment, primarily focused on bolstering Vanuatu's resilience against climate change impacts. Funds will be allocated to constructing 2 large data centers in Port Vila and Santo, alongside investments aimed at strengthening Vanuatu's overall security infrastructure. Initially, discussions surrounding visa-free travel for Vanuatu citizens were considered, but subsequently deferred to a separate, yet-to-be-confirmed subsidiary agreement. Australia's Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles emphasized the shared destiny of the nations, stressing the importance of a collaborative security environment. This agreement follows a similar, albeit unsuccessful, attempt in 2022, when Vanuatu's previous Prime Minister withdrew due to security concerns. Australia has been actively pursuing similar pacts with other Pacific nations, including a recent $190 million security agreement with the Solomon Islands and arrangements with Tuvalu and Papua New Guinea. The overarching goal is to secure long-term relationships and ensure stability within the region, acknowledging the shared future of these nations. The focus extends to economic transformation, including mobile labor mobility and financial support, signifying a broader commitment to Vanuatu's development and security. North Korea denies removal of propaganda loudspeakers at border. Recent tensions between North Korea and South Korea have escalated following South Korea's assertion that Pyongyang had deactivated its propaganda loudspeakers along the heavily fortified border. In a forceful rebuttal, Kim Yo-jong, the sister and influential advisor to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, vehemently denied these claims, asserting that North Korea has never removed the loudspeakers and is not willing to remove them. The statement, released by state media KCNA on Thursday, underscored the deeply entrenched animosity and lack of willingness to engage in dialogue between the two nations. Kim Yo-jong emphasized that North Korea's position regarding relations with South Korea remains unchanged, explicitly stating that this stance will be enshrined in the country's constitution in the future. This declaration signals a firm commitment to maintaining the current adversarial relationship. The move follows South Korea's own dismantling of some of its own propaganda loudspeakers, creating a further point of contention along the border. The removal of the loudspeakers, a long-standing feature of the border area, has been a source of friction for years. Both sides have used them to broadcast propaganda, music, and other messages, often laced with insults and threats. The incident highlights the continued instability and unpredictable nature of the Korean peninsula. The denial by Kim Yo-jong represents a clear signal of North Korea's determination to resist any attempts at reconciliation and underscores the ongoing strategic rivalry between the two states. The situation remains fragile and dependent on future diplomatic efforts, which appear increasingly unlikely given the current climate.